This is a global research platform that we're very proud to have done some innovation and hosting around for almost 10 years now. I'm Erica Steckler from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Dr. Mette Morsing. I will turn it over to you shortly. I'd just like to say a couple of words. I'll also invite Michael Pearson to say hello for a moment as well. The Necessary Conversation series is sponsored by the Donahue Center for Business Ethics and Social Responsibility in the Manning School of Business at UMass Lowell, and hosted also by the Gabelli School of Business at Fordham University. The series is also, and this maps to Mette as well, part of the Working Group on Humanistic Management of the United Nations Principle for Responsible Management Education, or PRIME. Michael, are you able to say a few words? Hello.
Yeah, well, thank you, Erica. Thank you, Mette, for doing this. And thank you, everybody else, for joining and your interest. And I see a number of familiar faces, and it's wonderful to continue this conversation, which we started with Mette as she was still in charge of the UN Prime, and now is shifted to another wonderful position in which she can have influence. And so it is great to sort of continue this overall conversation on how we can transform systems and use business education and maybe education more broadly to really see how can humanity actually save itself from itself, and in some way create a world that works for everyone. So thank you all for being here, and Mette, over to you, or Erica, to you.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So again, very briefly, before we have an opportunity to learn today with Dr. Morsing and everyone here today on the topic of the day, which is cross-sector partnerships and leadership towards climate action, I'd love to introduce Dr. Morsing, Professor of Business Sustainability and Director of the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment at the University of Oxford. Welcome. She leads a team of scholars committed to achieving net zero and the UN SDGs through interdisciplinary, international, and impactful teaching and research. She serves on numerous councils and advisory boards globally. She's previously served, as Michael mentioned, the United Nations in New York at the time, where she led Principles for Management Education, PRIME, the UN's largest initiative responsible for management, the UN's largest initiative, Responsible Management Education, with over 800 universities and business schools to transform leadership education toward the UN SDGs. Her research has won numerous awards. She's received very well-earned recognition. She is also an invited business and sustainability author, researcher, and speaker globally. And she has a recent co-edited textbook, which I'll put in the chat, The Corporate Sustainability: Managing Responsible Business in a Globalized World. Before I turn it over to Dr. Morsing, we will be recording this. We will also be moderating discussion and conversation through the chat. So please do put your questions, comments, resources. We really want that to be a living resource, and we will share that with you as well. With no further ado, Mette, welcome, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you so very much, Erika, and thank you very much, Michael, for the warm introduction. I'm so pleased to be here and see many familiar and also some new faces. It's a big honor to be back, and I'll never forget the day when I talked with you, Michael, for the first time. This is quite some years ago. So I called upon Michael to understand, what is this humanistic leadership, this humanistic management, what's going on in that PRIME work group, the working group. And I actually did not know, and that's why I called upon Michael to learn. And I remember, Michael, do you remember we had that conversation? I think it was scheduled for 30 minutes and we talked for 1.5 hours. And Michael was just sort of telling me about his grand vision for system change. And suddenly for me, that idea about humanistic leadership, humanistic management became much larger and much more ambitious, and also, you could say, much more relevant for what is needed in this world. So thank you, Michael, for that conversation and for trusting me and engaging me in your journey and in the wonderful work that you are still leading in that space. And please hang on to that, because we need more of it. So today I will talk about something maybe a little bit more sort of on the ground, but also something that I think is needed and that certainly can contribute if managed right to the humanistic leadership agenda. Talk a little bit about the cross-sector partnerships and the leadership needed to drive climate action. Next slide, please. And as we all know, the COP is on its very last days here in Baku. And we've just also finalized a very important biodiversity conference in Colombia just 4 weeks ago. And the result, you could sort of say, the voice that come out of these important annual conferences are sort of urging us and alarming us to step up and to engage even more on the rebalancing of society and on rebalancing the planet that we have. I think it's fair to say. So what I think, if we look across the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, there is one or maybe two that differentiates themselves a little bit from the rest of the goals in terms of being more thought of as global governance mechanisms. And one of them is the one I'm going to talk about here today, and that has to do with partnerships. And there's the global, the last global of the SDGs. And I will also talk about the leadership that, or put some words on the kind of leadership that is needed for the world. The next slide, please. But first, I would like for all of you to think here in this call. I'm not going to call upon you, but just to think about how many planets would we need if we all lived like the US. I think oftentimes we think, oh, it's somebody else's problem, or it's down there in the global south that's the problem, or it's certainly not us. But it's good to take a bit of a check sometimes and see. We know we only have one planet, but how many do you think we need? And actually, I have a suggestion here from Joy Roos, 4.5. Can I have the next slide here so we can see what's actually the estimate from Earth Overshoot Day, who has made this this kind of assessment for us, how many planets we need. And Joe, your assessment is quite right. It seems like 5 planets are needed if we all continue to live like we do in the US. Next slide, please. Let's just take a reality check for the part of the world that I'm... Oh, you use it in class. Thank you, Joe, for revealing that. So if we take it to the UK, the country where I'm currently located, next slide, please. What does that look like? It actually says 2.5 planets. And let's just take it to another place in the world. The next slide, let's take it to Africa. And one of the countries in Africa, how many planets would we need if we all lived like Niger, the French-speaking part or country of Africa? Next slide, please. We actually need the one planet we have. And interestingly, if we take stock of as you may remember, last year there was a stock taking exercise in the United Nations, looking upon halfway getting there to 2030, looking upon the Sustainable Development Goals and how far have we actually gotten on all 17 of them. And the general assessment last year was that we are seriously lacking behind. Progress on more than 50% of the targets was weak and insufficient, were the words. And this has not, over the past year, indeed not bettered. We still see also a fossil fuel industry that is sort of on the increase rather than on the decrease at this very moment. Next slide, please. So just to set the agenda, why are we so slow? Why do we change so slow in this world towards the climate change that we can all witness in our analysis, that our policymakers tell us we have to engage in, that some of us can actually, and I think it's fair to say more and more of us can see when we open our doors, when we go to the streets. The hurricanes in the United States and Florida and North Carolina just recently was indeed an evidence that this is not just happening in the so-called global south, it's actually happening right here, right now. And some people have started to talk about climate change is actually an ideology. it is something that we could address, we could solve, did we decide to do so. And there is some other things that are going on that has to do with the way we choose to govern the world. There's a lack of global coordination. There are economic interests that turn fossil fuels and subsidize fossil fuels going in the wrong direction. There is the well-known short-term focus in our capitalist societies. And there's also oftentimes a lack of political will, because it may take unpopular decisions and policies to rebalance society. It's also oftentimes a very complex issue. And I think many of our students, and I can speak for myself here, many of our students think it is so highly complex. It's abstract, it's technical, and by the way, it's into the future, distant. So why do I and how do I actually engage in doing something right here today? And there's also the technological challenges about costs and scaling. But again, my colleagues here working with the technological challenges ongoingly tell us we can actually do this. We know more or less how to engage our technologies in making betterment. The problem is that the right decisions are not taken. And of course, then there is the whole anti-ESG movement. And I think it's fair to say that in particular in the United States, it has really taken on, and it has created a kind of a concern. And as Joe, as you put in the chat right now, there's also a kind of a lack of trust, even in the sciences, telling us what we need to do. So in general, we could talk of a lack of a climate leadership to make those right decisions that we know we need to make to improve the world. Next slide, please. And I'm bringing in here the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who was my former boss. Not that I met him on a daily basis, but indeed was setting a tone, not just to the countries of the world that initially formed the United Nations and who are the platform for the United Nations, but also calling upon companies, calling upon firms, calling upon the leaderships in those corporations to help reset or set in a new way the world in balance again. And as you know, this is quite unique to hear the United Nations calling upon corporations. And just as a reminder, in the year 2000, when the United Nations Global Compact was established, this was a kind of a controversial unit in the United Nations, because here companies were invited to help better the world. And I think it's fair to say that today, 24 years later, corporations are, and here we can see by Antonio Guterres' call for corporations to actually help set the world on stage again. So again, a kind of from the United Nations call upon partnerships. No country alone, not countries alone, but in partnerships with businesses and all other representatives from civil society. There is a need to address these grand challenges collectively. Next slide, please. If we look upon some of our colleagues from economics, they in 2019 published an article where they're talking about 6 transformations that they suggest are needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's about the 6, I mentioned them on the slide here. It's about education, importantly, equality, health, decarbonization, food, cities, digital revolution. But I think importantly, and what I put in yellow here, is the collaborative leadership by governments, civil society, science, and business that is also called upon in this article. So one thing is the road map, you could say, the issues that we need to attend to. Another thing is the way we attend to, the way we engage. And this ongoing call for leadership across sectors, I think, is worth noting from this journal article as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is, again, the SDG number 17, Partnerships for the Goals. And next slide, please. And what does that actually mean? What is a cross-sector partnership? It's a partnership that brings together organizations that may have distinct goals, resources, and expertise to address complex issues or achieve common objectives. And the benefits include that you can actually have access to different kinds of resources, to innovation, improve problem solving, etc. I think it's interesting to think just recently I was reminded about, I think this was 2004 or 5, where there was an article in one of our corporate oriented management journals, Harvard Business Review, something there was the first journal article that was specifically calling companies to work with the NGO sector, and sort of calling upon companies and saying, hey, you may think of them as your enemies, but they may actually turn up as your friends as you approach new markets where they have expertise, new problems where they know also oftentimes the solutions, but they don't have the resources to engage you business, you do, etc. So you may think of cross-sector partnership, or we may think that's sort of a thing we've been engaging with for a long time. It's kind of a normal, but I think it's fair to say only 20 years ago, this was still being questioned. And I think it's also fair to say today that it is not easy. Cross-sector partnerships come with a lot of challenges, exactly for what is in the definition here, that these are organizations that bring to the table different kinds of interests and different kinds of traditions, different ways of working that may be difficult to reach a consensus about. Next slide, please. So cross-sector partnership models come in various shapes and various forms, various lengths. And here I just bring 4 different types of partnership models just to inspire a conversation with you also about not just these 4 models, but also other models, and and for us to think about what works and what doesn't work. I oftentimes use this for my students working with partnerships and working on sustainability to stimulate a discussion with them on the different kinds of impact that these partnership models can be hoped to have for the future. From the very simple partnership that is about a joint project, in this case, for example, Oxfam and Unilever going together for a short-term, one-time effort on to solve a particular problem about poverty and food in a particular region of the world, over to the joint projects that have that sort of engage multiple projects and that have deliverables about a single focus, but with a smaller set of parents or partners, until the multi-stakeholder initiative and until the very big, you could sort of say, collective impact for the future, where a partnership is not defined only, or not sort of designed only for a certain period of time, but will be established and potentially, in perpetuity, to actually reach a collective impact. And here I bring the example of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition on the next slide, please. So this is a cross-sector partnership for collective impact, and some of you may have acquainted you with this coalition, which is a truly industry-wide collaboration that brings together competitors within apparel and footwear to actually address some of the environmental and social challenges that are associated with the fashion industry. And this is a truly complex industry, as we know, one of the most polluting industries, with a lot of different issues, not just in terms of the environment, but indeed also in terms of human rights. And here in this partnership, we find that competitors within brands and retailers, manufacturers, suppliers, NGOs, and academia and governmental agencies work together to address some of these serious challenges. One of the sort of achievements that they have reached is to agree on a certain standard that they have managed to get thousands of companies to address and assign to, so that they work together to work together towards a kind of a minimum of what is sort of good standards, good ethical standards to work in this fashion industry, including suppliers as well. And I will not say that this is what I have read about this coalition, that this is an easy coalition, but it is somehow working, and it has somehow also actually made a kind of a significant contribution for that particular industry. Next slide, please. So what I think is really important when we talk about partnerships is that we are so focused on getting the right people around the table, hence my prior slide here, focused on we've got the suppliers, we've got the producers, we got even the consumers, got governments, we got NGOs around the table is as an input, the first stage here. I think what is often lacking in our assessments is the very right end of this slide, of the squares on the slide in orange here, namely what impact does that particular partnership actually have on the world. We also, and it takes a lot of thinking across all these 5 boxes on the slide. And again, I pay respect here to Thomas Winter, from whom I have borrowed this model. So it's the inputs, but it's also the activities that are more easy to measure. What kind of actions come out of the partnership? For example, how many meetings did we have? How much money did we put in? And what kind of activities came out of those or were related to those activities? More difficult to account for the outputs in terms of, for example, what kind of better monitors of air did we actually produce or install in our manufacturing units? What kind of water pollution assessments? What kind of new standards did we decide on adhering to? What kind of decarbonization outputs did we sort of in terms of policies did we adhere to in our company? And again, it's oftentimes policies and systems that we put in place we can account for. The next level is the outcome. And here we become a little bit more concrete in terms of how much our air pollution actually dropped as we installed new better monitors of air. How much cleaner did our air become? And how much CO2 did we actually remove from the world as we engaged in new systems and structures? And then the last box on the slide here, namely impact. What are the long-term effects of a particular input, of a particular partnership decision that we made? What broader than the program itself did our partnership actually contribute to? And here we're talking about better health for a society, better health for the world, for example, or more biodiversity, or these other kinds of global challenges where a particular partnership, particular project has actually impacted on the world. And I think oftentimes this is where it becomes very difficult. Oftentimes we are so happy with the partnership itself that we find it difficult to account for the impact. We find it difficult to measure the impact. And oftentimes the impact is also only seen years after we have engaged in a partnership. Next slide, please. So let me just finish off here by talking a little bit about the leadership that is needed to make these partnerships and towards climate action work in practical reality. Next slide, please. So we've seen some of the analysis, and there's a kind of a consensus in many of our institutions, ILO, Financial Times, World Economic Forum, and some of the UN organizations, that there is a need for reskilling our society in terms of sustainability skills, climate skills, but of course also really stimulated by new technologies as we see today with AI. Next slide, please. So if we look upon what are some of the skills that are in demand and that are needed in our workforce today, and here are some of the top 10 skills that has to do with better reasoning, better problem solving, even ideation is mentioned as one of the top skills, analytical thinking, innovation, active learning, learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking, etc. So this is not some NGO left-wing organization asking for these kind of skills in demand for our societies. This is actually the World Economic Forum asking for this kind of skills or saying these kind of skills will be needed to deliver on sustainability, to deliver on job and growth into the future. And I think it is interesting, and I can again take myself as an example for, is this really what I teach in the classroom? Or how do I bring these skills to the front amongst my students when teaching in the classroom? This is absolutely not the way I was taught to teach many years ago. So I think that certainly goes for many of my colleagues as well on an internal debate about how do we actually honor our students and help them develop these skills that are needed for the future. Next slide, please. And I think we can sort of say, well, there's a lot of skills that we can work with that is needed for our students, and it has to do with at least these 4 things. Of course, there is a need for a lot of knowledge about climate and sustainability, for understanding about the technical issues, understanding what decarbonization means from not just an engineering perspective, but also from a political perspective, and indeed from a business perspective. So there is a need for, Michael, what you call system thinkers to understand the complexities. But part of that system thinking has to do with, of course, the second agenda here on the slide, namely the skill set development. To understand that we may need our knowledge to be part of our teaching and to be part of the agenda, but that knowledge is also oftentimes delivered in a silo within a discipline and not a cross-discipline. It is also oftentimes a knowledge that become obsolete quite quickly as the world moves on. So there is a need to develop curious learners who are able to identify the problems themselves and also work across in partnerships with across other units, organizations, skill sets, and expertise that are able to talk across different kinds of communities. So curiosity is in demand. Thirdly, the practical relevance, that what we teach we have a kind of responsibility to make sure that what we bring into the classroom has to do with something that is of high relevance to our students, and that they understand that the planet is on fire, and that they also can actually contribute by thinking about the planet as one of the most important stakeholders. And finally, the global impact, that there is an ability training, ability to think long-term and not just for the short term in collaborative aspects. And then my final slide has to do with the sort of the role of the university and our students. And this is very much what I worked with when I was heading up Prime in the United Nations, this kind of agency that we somehow need to rethink when we engage with our students in the classroom. One of my colleagues here at Oxford said to me the other day, he's a professor of engineering, so teaching engineering students, that he thinks that his students, they are today acting towards climate change exactly like they were told to act towards COVID during the pandemic. Namely, stay at home, sit still, don't do anything. Somebody else is going to fix the problem for you. And that's a little bit the same with climate change. Don't do anything, sit still, stay at home. Somebody else is going to fix the problem for you. And it means that he said that his students have kind of lost a sense of agency, some of them being rather depressed even because they don't think and they don't see that they can themselves change the world for the better. So we were sort of in this lively discussion about how we can reinstall a kind of an agency in our students to understand that even when they are students, even when they are with us within the university, within the business school, they can actually contribute a little bit to change the world for the better. And I think that's a huge responsibility that we have for our students, which I think is at the key of the kind of climate change leadership skills that we need to bring to the forefront. Thank you very much.
Okay, wow. So much to think about and talk about. And I have to admit that I was not able to see the chat while I was scrolling through slides. So I am going to invite Isabel, if you wouldn't mind asking the first question. I'm just seeing that you would put a question in the chat, and I'd love for you to, join in.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, lovely to join this conversation and very exciting to see you, Mette. I was just curious to hear your experience with the students today about how they are engaging the inner dimensions or how they are responding when you invite them to ponder their inner dimensions, not just the intellect, but also their values, their sense of purpose, or their desire to make a difference.
Hi, Isabel. Wonderful to see you. I think you're the expert in this area, more so than I am, actually.
Well, but your students is your experience, and that's what's interesting.
So you mean like the students' experience with working with themselves?
Yes, if you see any reactions, like are they open when you bring up values, for example? Because so many times we stay outside of values, and that is also value. So when we bring back the attention, so what are we acting upon? Who do we want to be? Are they receptive? What is your experience?
Yeah. Again, but thank you for raising this very important question, Isabel. I can see a number of colleagues here on this call that have worked with this for many years. Jim, for example, I remember you sent me your curriculum many years ago, and this was exactly what you were actually working with your students on at the time. And I thought, this is many years ago, Jim. And I thought that was pretty courageous because oftentimes students will take a kind of a distance towards it because this is not what they came to learn. They came to learn some knowledge and not about values. So rather than me talking about this, I would rather invite yourself and Jim to talk about, your experience with exactly that. I think there's still a kind of a distance.
Yeah.
That this is not something we bring into the classroom.
I think there's so much power there. And it obviously depends how we phrase it, because sometimes they take a distance. We don't talk about emotions, but when you say what is important for you, that is very pragmatic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, but it's a totally different way to create a classroom experience. And I like your list when you had, oh, are we doing these things? No, these are new frontiers. And
I think what I saw recently here at Oxford was the vice chancellor's, you could say the first lab she did, where she had 200 students in the room from all undergraduate students from all disciplines. And they were tasked over a 3 month period to develop a project amongst themselves. So they were sitting philosophers together with engineers, with hydrologists, with, all kinds of sciences. And it was interesting to see when they 3 months later were presenting how many of them expressed a surprise in terms of, the values that they were confronted with from other students that had to sort of tease out their own stance, you could sort of say. So I think that interdisciplinary space is also another way of engaging students in surfacing, you could say, their own values, their own assumptions.
otherwise, we don't see them. It's like when we go on a trip, we notice our values because they're different from what we're seeing. So a different discipline is a different angle to look at it. Yeah.
But
Interesting.
maybe Jim, I can invite you on to think with us, because you've been in that space for a long time.
Well, thanks for calling me out. It's
Sorry.
nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
There's so much to be said. Like many people here, I have a pedagogy to do that, and it's rooted in respect and curiosity and safety, and using the mechanisms of control to force people to be present. If I could be paradoxical about it, but doing it in an arena of respect and safety and curiosity. What's interesting these days is what I hear is something I used to hear way back when, is the distinction between students as individual students and then students as a group, and then almost turning into a mob. And I hadn't heard that I've been doing this now for 40 years. That was quiet for a long time, but now I just hear a lot of concerns among my colleagues about attendance is down, AI is in play, people aren't taking it seriously, all of that. And it's a game, sort of, and much like that COVID idea, put your hands up and we're privileged, it'll be fine. But yet, when I meet and talk with students as individuals, they're as alive and passionate as they ever were. And so that's and so I'm doing a different kind of teaching right now, and not that course I was doing, which drew me in for almost 20 years. But I'd be curious to how people are navigating that tension between what's going on with the collective of students these days, and then the individual life experiences of individuals that are living within that collective and within the world that Mette so cogently and articulately presented to us. And we can talk offline about pedagogy. I don't want to do that right now. It just seems crazy, but if you want, we can. But
Thanks, Jim. I also see, Joe, you've been chiming in on the chat a little bit. Did you have a question or something you'd like to just share a little briefly so that we can continue with Q&A and discussion?
Well, just to support Jim's point, one of the ways I echo every single thing he just said. The way that I'm dealing with it is in a lot of group work. And I find that the group work is trying to infect the other way. I actually don't find quite the same mob mentality, but we're just doing our final project right now, and sustainability for clothing and fashion is so big, mental health is so big that it's not hard. Our focus, as to Jim's point, is more about making this a value, not an interest, because your interests change, but not your value, especially in the US, where it feels like we're about to go full speed reverse. Just keeping them going. And they don't seem to be, maybe it hasn't taken effect yet, but they don't seem to be that depressed about it. I'm optimistic about the future. I think we all just have to be patient for a few years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I see that, Amy, you've raised your hand. Would you like to chime in?
Yeah, hi. I'm from Victoria, BC, so it's someone from Vancouver. My question, I've been working in this space, and my question is, it seems like a lot in interorganizational collaboration depends on people with power. And what I've seen is the people who are at mid-levels of management, they are showing that leadership, but they're doing it at personal cost. And in fact, all of their amazing skills aren't going to get them there because there's other things in play, right, that are higher up. And more, I'm just being very realistic and almost pessimistic when talking to those mid-level people who are passionate advocates, because they burn themselves out and they often don't get promoted because they're busy building relationships that doesn't show up in their evaluation and doesn't necessarily rise them up in the organization. And then there's so many factors that are just above them that when it comes to interorganizational collaboration, very few people seem to hold the strings. So I guess I would just ask about that.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good observation, and something that we should really think a lot about. I will say that, again, based on my little experience here at Oxford, we have a Master of Sustainability program. It's a one-year program. It's called Master of Sustainability, Enterprise and Environment. It is the most sought after master across the whole university. We have more than 700 applications every year, and I have 25 seats. And why, when I ask students, why did you, apply to this program? The answer number one that comes up as number one is because this was the only interdisciplinary master I could find on sustainability. So I think that these, just to get back to what you were alluding to, Amy, about the interdisciplinarity, the working across. These students, they strategically pursue that for their master, not their undergraduate, but for their master sort of experience, because they want to be confronted with these other ways of looking upon the phenomenon. And that is also what we get sort of really, a lot of good comments about in the evaluation afterwards, that they really enjoyed to be presented with the complexity and also with the idea that they have themselves to invent new ways of dealing with this. So there is, I think in that generation, there is an understanding of that they're not just sitting waiting, to be delivered the answer. They know they have to come up and invent it, if you like, themselves.
Thank you. I'm seeing also from Michael, who isn't available to ask the question, but also resources in the chat already. Mette, what kind of leader should we be developing through education? And you had mentioned a few on one of your slides as far as qualities of leadership, but are there exercises? Are there do you have strategies in your own class that you find have been more effective as far as developing these leaders in climate?
Yeah, I think this thing about but thank you, Michael, for the question. I think this thing about not serving basically not serving the problem for the students, but letting them co-identify the problem themselves. It's a bit different way of thinking about how we deliver or engage in teaching case studies, where the problem is oftentimes already designed into the case study, but asking the students to identify a problem or the problem, and also trying to answer why is that problem not already solved, will engage them in sort of much broader system thinking than just thinking about how the business, in this case, survives. Then I do think that I'm concerned about a lot of the tendency, and I would love to hear what you think. A lot of the tendency where we see, at least in some countries in Europe, where we are reducing the number of international students in our universities for some economic argumentation, meaning that we'll have fewer international students engaging with our local students, thereby also not being exposed to those differences that comes with being exposed to a plethora of cultures in the classroom. I'm concerned about that because I do see how much learning comes out of being confronted with the other in terms of disciplines, but also the other in terms of cultures. So this is something, of course, we worked a lot with in Prime, and a lot of the work that's still going on in Prime is to have a convening platform for students from different spaces of the world to actually meet and learn from each other.
Wonderful. I see also Radha in the comments had talked about a cross-sector partnership that you facilitate in your classroom with NGO associations with your students. Would you like to just say a little bit about that so we can all learn from that experience? And then Ron, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Yeah, we are a management institute, and we have not only introduced a core course on sustainability, but we have embedded sustainability in all the functional courses of management, marketing, finance, operations, and so on. And in addition, as part of our pedagogy, we assign each MBA student to an NGO. We have some 145 NGOs associated with us. And every student is assigned to an NGO for a period of maybe 1 week to 10 days. And they take up a project, they work in the field, they try to do their bit, and based on that, they submit a report and the viva is taken. So thereby, it helps in changing the mindset. Many of them get touched by things. It could relate to poverty, it could relate to eradication of, illiteracy, or it could relate to anything, So, so these students, when they come back and submit their reports, and when we ask them questions, that we also have a sustainability club for students, and our students participate in a number of inter-institute activities. In fact, today itself, we have had an international conference involving 5 countries today and tomorrow. It was a hybrid conference. So we are closely associated with UNGC. So we do academic partnership with UNGC for various SDGs. Gender equality is one, and management education, and some of the SDG goals. So I think this way, we are able to help the students in the right direction. Some of them take up a career in that. Some of them set up some industry who are into entrepreneurship for circular economy and things like that. So
Thank
we are
you.
trying
So,
to target. Thank you.
so folks know to reach out to Radha as a resource for how to do this cross-sector partnership learning in our management programs. Ron, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the conversation earlier, Mette, and what Isabel was talking about. To say when you said, and I thought that you summarized the whole problem of how you've had to change your teaching from the way you've been normally were taught to teach. And the way we framed it, I'm at Presidio Graduate School, and we are presently attempting to bridge the schism between the Presidio Graduate School and the San Francisco Theological Seminary, and to try to bring the students, the MDiv students, together with the MBA students to see what is the common language to bring together. So I'd be curious, the way we framed it is around 2 things. One is we say that how you learn is important as what you learn, and we attempt to be more student-centric as opposed to content-centric. But I'd really be curious, we've been struggling with the words about spirituality, morality, moral education. We've been talking with the people at the Department of Educational Studies at Oxford, and their theme has been moral education in a secular society. And I just didn't know if or how the more spiritual values-based language, and I'm looking at Isabel there, is helpful, or a way to frame this dimension and how important it is. Last thing I will say is that we're still dumbfounded in the U.S. that 80% of Christian evangelicals voted for Trump. So clearly this moral or spiritual or religious dimension is there, and I think business has to address it at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a very, very good point. A very good point. I think it's probably difficult to bring into a business school more so than into the more general university, I can imagine. At least this is something that my colleagues in the humanities, they are very eager to speak about, more so than in my colleagues in the STEM sort of area at the university. But I really don't think we should shy away from it, but we need to engage with this carefully, because of course it underpins a lot of the way we engage with our students and the way we engage with the world.
Naima, did you have a question?
I wanted to just contribute to the conversation from a student perspective. So I'm joining in from Canada. I'm at the University of Waterloo. I'm a PhD candidate. I'm working on my research now, done with all my requirements, and my research is focused on cross-sector partnerships for local climate action. And so this has been a really wonderful session for me, just learning and caring. And just on the topic of building students' skill set, just wanted to put in my 2 cents. As we heard, that embedding sustainability into the curriculum of other courses, other disciplines, is really, I think, key in starting to prepare students, not just within the sustainability sphere, but more broadly, and starting to build in that interdisciplinarity. I do teach at a college here in Canada, Ontario, and I developed the curriculum and the course outline and the course content for supply chain management, and I embedded sustainability right into that whole course, and that was super helpful to start to get people to see they're not disparate but connected. But the more important point I wanted to make was from a student's perspective, and just partnership in general, is consensus building is a very important skill set when it comes to collective action. And even in my research, that's what I'm learning. We interviewed 12 different partnerships across Canada with municipalities and private business and not-for-profit. And key piece is how do you get people to come to agreement to recognize what are those shared goals? And sometimes those goals may not be completely the same, but there's always a commonality towards saying we care about the planet, we care about people, and we care about how people live and sustain themselves. And so bringing in that commonality to build consensus, I think is a great skill set, in addition to inclusion, because equity is also a big point of discourse within the sustainability field, particularly when we talk about sustainable development goals. Oftentimes in what we call the global south, there's always this question of, yes, we need to be sustainable, but we're lagging behind, for example. And I say we because my background is from South Asia. And we say we need to advance, but now we're being told control how much you pollute the air because it's already been damaged by everybody else who was already advanced and in a really good place. So those questions of equity and climate justice are also very critical. So bringing in those perspectives of inclusivity, what is justice, what is consensus, how do we kind of navigate conversations where there is polarization, I think is a great skill set to build for climate leadership.
Yeah.
Great. I don't see other hands up at the moment. And again, I'm seeing a lot of resources in the chat, which is just excellent. One question I have for you, Mette, because the work we need to do on cross-sector partnerships and advancing climate leadership in a serious way, what are we, many of us here are academics, we're scholars, we teach, but how do we make the impact? Is there a way that, you found in your career, you've clearly made a lot of impact. Do you have suggestions for how each of us can leverage a little bit more of our aspirations?
I've learned a new concept that, and a little bit more in depth, the concept of sensitive intervention points. Sort of to spot those, no matter what career, no matter what space in your life you are in, just to think a little bit about what are those sensitive intervention points where you, with relatively, you could sort of say, affordable energy or from your own space, you can actually make the most impact. That way you can actually engage in a positive way. And it may be via your research, if that's your sensitive intervention point, or it may be with your, particular class you're teaching every year, or it may be with your engagement with some NGOs or businesses, etc. An example is one of my colleagues here. She is Alexis, and she has indeed found her sensitive intervention point in terms of educating students online in climate change. And these are students who are youth, they're not students, all of them, between 18 and 30 years old. And she offered last year for the first time a for free online course over 3 months for youth who wanted to become more making an impact within climate change space. And she had 4,500 youth from all over the world in her online course, and for free, being taught, what does it mean what does climate change mean? Because it is very, as I said before, it's very technical for many. It's very distant. Oh, it's 2050 or 2080, or, so I don't have to do anything, or it's very technical, or it is something that the politicians decide about, or it's the engineering and biology department. It's not me in business school. So she got these students together to learn a little bit from all these different spaces what climate change is about, to educate them to stand on a firmer platform when they are out to help change the world just a little bit better. And I think it's fair to say one woman was, orchestrating this program for 4,500 students, and she's doing the same in a little different way this year, but that's her sensitive intervention point. And I just thought that's such a beautiful example of someone who really found a space where she can have a real sort of positive impact for the world.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to invite Jim, who posted in the comment as well, because I think you might have some sensitive intervention point ideas to share.
Yeah, the only thing I can share is it's that I've just become more and more alert to over the years is I guess two little chestnuts in my head. One from Louis Pasteur, "Chance favors the prepared mind," or some that's pretty close to the quote. And then "Go to the light." My sense is if you just keep moving, you know, I'm living in a land of refrigerator magnets. Go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Who's that, Thoreau or somebody, or Lincoln or somebody? But you just make choices where that honor your own integrity of your and then make commitments that have that integrity, and then doors open for you and more doors open for you. But the key is to not look over your shoulder like you're still in a junior high school cafeteria wondering what the cool kids are doing or what the associate dean wants you to do. Honor your own gifts and your own capabilities, continue to develop them, and then the world just opens up before you. It's just amazing. And then, the next thing you spend, 3 years on Zoom calls with Mette, which is what I've done recently. It's just by virtue of other random notions. But if you don't do that, then you find yourself just living an arid life. So I don't know. That's it. That's all I can. And again, I bring it to life with what I'm doing, but it's just compelling to me. That's the way this works.
I'm so happy to hear that. I'll invite you to some more Zoom meetings, Jim.
Well, this meeting is great. I'm taking screenshots of all these comments and looking up what people are suggesting. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful.
Oh, I agree.
Mette, I'd like to invite you if you have any closing thoughts or remarks. You're welcome to do that before we wrap up.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I really, really think that I wanted to hear more from you, that I wanted to hear from myself, and I really appreciate all the comments in the chat and the comments here. And thank you so much for being here for this last hour.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mette. Thank you all for joining for this conversation and all the conversations we have together. I know I see many of you quite often. So stay tuned for what's coming next, and wonderful end of November and December 2024 time. So thank you very much, everybody.
Bye. Bye. Bye.